we have notes on the song that we just heard for our offering. No, go ahead, Brenda, you're up next. That we didn't have time to put into your order of service. But if you would like the notes on that song, Hope, I find them very meaningful. I'm going to put them back here on this table for you to take home with you. And now we turn to Brenda Ridley.
Well, this seems appropriate. Good morning, everybody. I have a short reading by Howard Zinn before I share a reflection with you. This is called Hopefulness in Bad Times. Howard Zinn is a late historian and philosopher. To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act and at least the possibility of sending the spinning top of a world in a different direction. And if we do act, in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents, and to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory. So if you're a humanist, agnostic, or atheist, you can't say it's your fault to something in which you don't believe. You can't blame God when things go wrong. So who can you blame and what do you do? Like many people who worked hard to send Kamala Harris to the White House in January, I was stunned on November 6th when I found out she was defeated. I had just attended a rally for the Harris Waltz campaign 1 week before, where attendees jumped up and down, sang, danced, and chanted as we waited for the keynote by President Barack Obama. On Election Day, I greeted voters and watched them cast their ballots at a school in Kensington. The energy at the polling place was upbeat. New voters and voters who had not cast ballots in years emerged from the booths beaming with pride as they plastered the "I voted" stickers to their chests. I was overcome with emotion, and I still am, and hope that we the people was indeed a reality. The next day, I felt like someone slammed my head into a wall, and I was seeing stars. I was nauseous and hyperventilating when I found a seat on the sofa before I passed out. I couldn't think or talk. All I could do was cry. What bothered me more than my candidate losing the election was the profound disappointment I felt in my fellow human beings. For the life of me, I couldn't understand how a majority of voters could look past the character flaws, racism, misogyny, vindictiveness, hate, the 39 felony convictions, and the bad behavior of a man whose previous term in office inflicted so much suffering on so many people. But this is not a rant about that man. Clearly, I underestimated and misjudged people. I trusted in the goodness of people, and they pulled the rug from underneath my feet. So what happened wasn't God's fault. People made their own decisions in the voting booth. Did the fact that they chose to support someone for president who appeared so flawed mean the Trump supporters were bad people? So as a humanist who came to humanism from a more traditional religious background, it's a challenge to move beyond ideas of good and bad people while acknowledging that sometimes people behave badly and it doesn't necessarily mean they're bad. Conversely, the opposite is also true. People with good intentions are not necessarily good. While I believe we have a propensity toward goodness, we also have tendencies toward badness. By that I mean we can be greedy, cold, selfish, power-hungry, and hateful. We're capable of incredible cruelty to one another, as well as tenderness and compassion. Goodness and badness are not external qualities. They're not some force floating in the air. They both reside in each of us, informing the choices and decisions we make. The Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung talked about human beings having a side of the self that's presented to the world and of which we are mostly conscious, and a shadow side where the less desirable aspect of ourselves reside and of which we're mostly unaware. Human motivation is driven by both sides. It's easy to forget this duality in ourselves when something goes wrong. Our first impulse is often to blame those people over there and to label them stupid, misguided, haters, racist, and worse. Blame others, people, and sets them apart. Blame makes it easy to dehumanize those who have different perspectives, other ideas, or different ways of moving in the world. Under other circumstances, we can become those people over there who are the cause of this or that problem and deserving of some negative consequence. What do we do with the realization that as humans, we can be in either and both camps, that we can set into motion actions that lead to disastrous outcomes or that benefit the common good? The only thing we can do is accept our humanity, because we will always be in battle with ourselves over these issues. We can celebrate when things go well, and when things go wrong, we can try to understand and challenge ourselves to make things right instead of blaming someone. I wish I could say I had an immediately rational response to the election results, but I didn't. I wasn't ready to hug those voters who made a different choice than I did and still see them as fellow human beings. Instead, I went into mourning. I mourned the loss of the image of America as a beacon to anyone who wants to live in a pluralistic, democratic society. I mourn the loss of opportunities to put more chairs at the table for women, people of color, immigrants, elders, young people, and childless cat ladies. I mourn the lives that might be negatively impacted by the leadership we voted in. And I allowed myself to feel the weight of disappointment in people. Mourning is necessary for making room for something new. So I gave myself to it. And giving myself time to mourn helped me to recall the voices and actions of activists who experienced monumental setbacks in their work and kept moving. People like Dr. Martin Luther King, John Lewis, Shirley Chisholm, Fannie Lou Hamer, and so many others, too numerous to name. They kept moving one step at a time, and for every step forward, they were pushed back one step, but they kept at it until the wheels of social change moved an inch or lurched forward. Slowly, the feelings of disappointment are lifting, and I'm resisting the feelings of fear and despair that are lurking to take its place. The day after the election, I found solace in the beginnings of renewed faith in people when I read an essay by writer and activist Rebecca Solnit, who said, "Finding community and building and strengthening relationships with people you trust and agree with about moral and political issues is important. It will strengthen you and give you people to act with when it's time to act." Solnit's words helped me to see that in the run-up to the election, I found two new communities of people with visions of what this country could be. And I joined them in writing letters and postcards, marching in a parade, knocking on neighbors' doors to urge them to vote. Excuse me. While I could have done any of these activities on my own, it was more fulfilling and much more fun to work alongside a determined array of folks who I might not have met otherwise. My new communities have suffered a setback, but we aren't giving up. We are staying connected and celebrating together. We're taking a short break from the intensity of campaign work and recharging for what some are calling Trump 2.0. The strong and wide-ranging communities all over the country that came together in the last few months give me hope and faith that although change comes in increments and back steps, it does come if we drive it. I've resolved to stay with my communities, doing what I can, when I can, to help drive change. And my hope for you is that you find your community and huddle close, and that you strengthen yourself for the uncertainties that lie ahead. Ashe.
We'll invite you to stay seated for our next hymn, which is number 1002 in the Teal hymnal. It's called Comfort Me. And we're going to sing all the verses as Lynn leads us on the piano. Number 1002, Comfort Me. The words are also on the screen. Thank you, Brenda, and thank you, Lynn. Friends, let's take one more breath together. there's a word that was in our newsletter called Theodicy that some of you may have heard or you may have seen before. Some of you may know what it means. But if you don't, Theodicy is a fancy word for why bad things happen in the world. My very first ministry job was working at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia as a pediatric chaplain. And lots of my time was spent with families, more so than with the children. But one of my patients was a teenage girl who was a softball player. She played third base, which was my position. And we bonded over that, and she was undergoing chemo treatment and waiting on a stem cell transplant. And she felt very self-conscious about losing her hair, and I think a little bit awkward to have a 24-year-old male come into her room and want to talk to her about God or whatever she wanted to talk about. And I loved getting to chat with her. I did not love getting to chat with her family, especially her father, who was a devoutly Catholic man and had a really hard time, understandably, wrestling with what was happening to his daughter. And that was fine, but what was not fine was that he would hijack my visits when I came to see my patient. He would want to talk about his stuff, which is sometimes understandable and sometimes what needs to happen. But his stuff was not about what was happening here in this room. I will never forget that we were talking about the upcoming stem cell transplant. We were going to do a blessing of the stem cells, and we were going to have lots of folks there on our support team. It was going to be a really great thing. She was feeling very positive about it. And he kept interjecting. You know, I just can't understand why we let abortion happen in this country. That's fine. Reasonable people can disagree. I don't know why this is being brought up now. What is happening? He could not engage with the grief. He could not wrestle with the emotion. He could not be present to what was happening in the room, right? He had to find something to blame. And it had to be out there, or it had to be about them. It had to be far away. It had to be remote. At that time, I was in seminary, and I was taking a class on the book of Job. This is in the Hebrew scripture. Some of you may be familiar with it. It is one of my favorite pieces of literature in the entire world, and it is not a fun read. It is not action-packed. It is not happy. It is full of despair and full of suffering. Very briefly, if you're not familiar with the story, it is about a man named Job who lives in the biblical equivalent of a land far, far away. And he is said to be blameless, to live a sinless life. But the figure of God and the figure of someone called the adversary or the advocate make a bet on Job's life, that he would turn his back on his faith and his tradition if bad stuff happened to him. Job had everything in the world. He was rich. He had a big family. He had lots of camels and cattle. And the advocate says to the God character, yeah, but that's just because Job has everything he needs. If you took all that stuff away, he would curse you. He would blame you. And God says, okay, let's make a bet. Do what you need to do, only spare his life. And all these horrible things happen to the character of Job. And the author lifts up that he continues to not blame God. And some more bad things happen to Job. And he continues to not blame God. Job's wife, on the other hand, says, God can get out of here. Turn your back. Curse God. And Job refuses. And then these three friends come into the picture. And the story says, and they came to witness Job's suffering. And they didn't have anything to say. So they sat down and sat with him. That's in chapter 2 or 3. There are 42 chapters in Job. The next 38, 39 chapters are the friends not in fact sitting there quietly and witnessing to Job's suffering, but in fact them yapping about why the bad stuff is happening. If you're into that kind of thing, it's very interesting and very informative. But authors believe, or scholars believe, that the original story was that little short story with the bet and the bad things happening and Job refusing to turn his back on God and the friends coming to witness the suffering and sitting there quietly. End of story. But people back then were also wondering, what do we do when bad things happen? They were wrestling with this question of theodicy. How do we make sense of the world in which bad things happen, which terrible things happen, in which young girls get sick, in which we put felons into the White House, we drop bombs on innocent people? How do we make sense of this? I love this story, and I'll tell you why. Because when I woke up the day after the election, started doom scrolling on my phone, I saw a lot of both grief and refusal to engage with grief, and simply trying to find blame, trying to cast blame, trying to find a reason, trying to answer why. Why did this happen? How did this happen? There can be a humanist explanation. There can be a theistic explanation. I guarantee you people on the quote-unquote other side have a theistic explanation for what's happening. But when I read the book of Job, and I read these 40-some chapters of these three friends talking about why bad things happen, what Job must have done wrong, why the world works the way it does, you get to the end of the story, and the God character, God's self, comes in and says, you three idiots don't know what you're talking about. And God addresses Job. A courtroom scene plays out. And in the end, you never find out why the bad things happen. They never tell you. God doesn't say. Job doesn't say. The author of the story doesn't say. Because remember, the original story was short. Bad things happened. The friends came. There was nothing to say. They simply sat and witnessed to the suffering. They were present to it. When we look at a world where bad things happen, I often find myself trying to answer the same question. I wonder if the wisdom of this wisdom literature from the ancient world is that we don't know. I don't know why bad things happen. I don't believe that those things come from a God. I don't believe that those bad things come from love with a capital L. But maybe. I don't know why we find ourselves in the position we find ourselves now, where we have to start thinking about, will we offer sanctuary to people in our building to prevent them from being taken away from their families? I don't know why we have to prepare for the possibility of more conflict, more political violence. I don't know why we have to prepare for the onslaught of news that will just assault our senses relentlessly in January. I don't know. But what I do know is that there is an antidote for that suffering that is presented in this book of Job. And it is not in the talking. It is not in the casting blame. It's not in the trying to rehash the old problems and figure out why there's evil in the world. Simply to do what the friends do. To come and bear witness. To come and be together. To hold one another. To help each other through this. And then it's what Job does at the very end of the story. It's that rather than trying to blame God anymore, he refuses to give up on his own sense of perfection. Right? He says, I did not do anything wrong, and nothing anyone can say will make me say differently. So it must be God's fault. And the God character comes in with my favorite line from all of ancient scripture. The Job character cries out, why is this bad stuff happening? Why is there evil in the world? Why did it happen to me, someone who did everything right? Why have I found myself here in this position? And the God character answers. Does anybody know what the God character says off the top of their head? No. The Satan is the advocate, the adversary. Linda, do you know? That's in a different place. But immediately after Job says, why does this happen? He's yelling, he's angry, he's frustrated, engaging with his grief. Why do bad things happen? And the God character, this is a play, comes down from on high and says, Job, who are you to question the creator of the hippopotamus? Who are you? Have you seen the crocodile? Who are you? Have you looked up in the stars in the sky? The point is that the world, that nature, that the universe is infinitely complex and beautiful and strange and huge, much more than we can imagine, much more than we physically can imagine. That to simply sit and ask these questions is a never-ending story. We don't know why bad things happen. But take a look around. Look at the wonders that are here in the world. And then look a little bit closer to home. Because the last antidote for what to do with suffering and how do we respond to evil in the world is that Job finds a way to be at peace. He says, bad stuff happens. I don't know why. But I've come to terms with that. And he turns and he looks at his wife, the forgotten character of this story. And the text says that Job's fortunes are restored, that everything that he lost comes back to him, right? What that glosses over is that what Job lost was his family, his children. And you cannot simply replace that. The text immediately glosses over it and says that Job had 10 more children. So imagine what it would be like to be Job's wife. Or to be Job, to come to this understanding that bad stuff happens in the world. We can't always protect the people we love. There are greater forces at work, right? And yet to still make the choice to restart your life, to bring more children into the world, to continue to live in such a place is the bravest, most loving thing there is in the Bible, my friends. I think the point of this story is not just that suffering happens, which it does, and not trying to figure out why, which I don't know, but that what we do in the face of that is we look around, we look up, we take in the world for all that it is, the beauty and the wonder of the hippopotamus, the beauty and the wonder of the stars in the sky, the beauty and the wonder and the horror and the frustration of America. And just say it is. And rather than trying to figure out why, the antidote is to get through it. To get through it with the people you care about and the people who need your support. I don't know how to eliminate all the suffering in the world. I know only two things to be true that I learned in seminary. I don't know how to cure cancer. I don't know how to get a closed-off father to engage with his grief. I don't know how to fix what's coming in January. Because I know only two things to be true. for those who are theists like me, God is God and I am not. So what I need to do is to help get through this suffering, to try and lessen it where we can, to try and get up, stand up where we need to, and to make sure that we endure the bad things that happen, rather than getting stuck and trying to ask why and trying to figure out to escape from it. Because the answer is not out there. It's not far away. Casting blame might feel good, but it does not solve the problem. But if we come together when bad things happen, and we sit together, if we don't have the words, we don't need them. But we come and we hold one another and we help one another get through it and endure. Maybe that's where we'll find a love at the center of all of this. That is my deep hope. That when we don't know what to say, we'll do. We'll comfort. We'll sing. We'll dance. We'll speak to one another. We'll comfort each other. Oh, my soul. May it be so. Amen. Let's take a moment just to sit with the quiet of these words.